Hi, I'm Chris Bou Saeed, Los Angeles domestic violence attorney. Welcome to CBS Law, where we deliver results, not promises. Let's talk about things you need to know if you've been arrested for or charged with domestic violence. First, emergency protective orders. If you've been issued an emergency protective order by the police when you're arrested, what that means is you can't have any communication with your partner who's the alleged victim until that emergency protective order expires. Those emergency protective orders, or EPOs for short, generally are temporary. They're only about 7 days long. Importantly, they weren't issued by your partner. They weren't issued by the police. They were issued by a judge. And as a lawful court order, if you violate the terms of that EPO, even if your partner tells you it's okay, that would be a new substantive crime of violation of a court order, and you'd be looking at additional charges and also complications when it comes to your bail or release on your own recognizance. Second, charges. In the vast majority of arrests for domestic violence, the police will classify the arrest as a felony violation of Penal Code Section 273.5. Now, just because the police have classified the arrest as a felony doesn't mean that's what you'll actually be charged with. Ultimately, it'll be up to the prosecuting agency to determine whether, if a case is going to be filed, whether it'll be filed as a misdemeanor or as a felony, not the police. The factors that the prosecutor will look for are, first, what is the extent of the injuries? If we're talking about broken bones, wounds requiring stitches, the loss of consciousness, the loss of organ function, or disfigurement, that's going to lead likely to felony charges. If we don't have those kinds of injuries, and we're just talking about scratches or bruises or nothing at all, it's likely going to lead, if filed, to misdemeanor charges. Third, things you need to know when interviewing attorneys to represent you in a domestic violence case. First, what is their experience with domestic violence cases? Second, what resources do they have at their disposal to first and foremost try to get the prosecuting agency to reject the criminal case? In other words, to get the prosecuting agency to decide that there's insufficient evidence to charge you with a crime. But also, if a case is filed, what resources do they have at their disposal to make sure that that case gets dismissed? At CBS Law, we utilize investigators to not only conduct interviews and collect evidence, but also expert witnesses to evaluate and undermine the allegations against you. For example, we often use expert witnesses in domestic violence cases, like medical doctors, to evaluate the allegations of exactly what your partner says you did to them and compare what they say you did with their actual injuries. In other words, to undermine that you actually committed the mechanics of whatever allegation they said, because there would be an expectation that the injury or wound would look a certain way, and it just simply doesn't align with the allegation. Also, you're going to want to know that your partner, once that emergency protective order expires, they can go and seek a domestic violence restraining order. But if they don't, then under the law, you are able to communicate with them. And the general idea is you rather have an ally than an enemy. Next thing you need to consider, if you've been arrested or charged with domestic violence, is the potential job implications. If you're a licensed professional, in other words, you have licensure from the state of California to perform your job. I'm talking about nursing, real estate agents, doctors, dentists, lawyers. A conviction here could lead to the suspension of your license. In other words, prevent your ability from continuing to practice your craft. There also may be mandatory disclosure obligations or not. So you're going to need to speak to an attorney that is familiar with those obligations to make sure you don't take any steps that can not only harm your legal interests as far as the criminal case, but also your professional interests. You should also know that diversion may be available for your case. There are things like mental health diversion, or military diversion, or even informal diversion that can be undertaken to try to spare you the consequences of not only the criminal conviction, but the consequences that flow from that conviction. And so you're going to want to make sure that you speak to an attorney that knows right away what actions to take, and more importantly, what actions not to take, to make sure that we maximize the probability that the case against you is rejected or, if filed, dismissed. So, if you find yourself arrested or charged with domestic violence, call CBS Law now at 213-800-8005 so we can get started building your defense and defending your reputation. So call CBS Law now, and together we'll get your life back.